So this particular video is going to cover how India becomes independent. It becomes its own country instead of being a colony of Great Britain. It's also going to talk briefly about some of the modern day issues that are associated with India and the region in general. All right, so remember that India is a colony of Great Britain. It was the most profitable colony once Great Britain lost the American colonies after the American Revolution in the 1700s. India becomes the most profitable colony for Great Britain. They even call it the crown jewel of the British Empire, partially because the British royalty actually stole some of the crown jewels of the leaders of Mughal India. So Britain had been treating India like a colony, which means that people living in India, regardless of race or religion, are citizens of Great Britain. And because of that, they should have enjoyed the same rights as all British citizens were enjoying. And I mean, at this point, this is the 1900s. This is post World War II that we're talking about this movement. And so they should have been receiving the same rights as everyone that was in the United Kingdom. However, it wasn't happening. There was a lot of racial injustices that were happening in India because the government, despite India having a massive population almost solely of people of Indian descent, the British had been in power for so long that the people who were running the government, the legislators, were all mostly white Englishmen and descendants of white Englishmen. So the policies were written in such a way that there was a lot of segregation that was happening, and there was a lot of discrimination that was happening legally, similar to what was happening in the United States at the time. When you think about the Jim Crow South laws related to the American South during the early part of the 1900s. And there's going to be a movement, an independence movement, that's going to create new states. Remember, we've talked about this word state several times. It really means country. There's going to be new countries in what is called the Indian subcontinent. So that land south of the Himalayas, where that's going to encompass several countries. It'll encompass India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And what comes out of the Indian independence movement, which is not, it's noticed that it's called a movement. It's not called a war. It's not the Indian Revolution. It's an independence movement because it's largely nonviolent, is that it creates the Republic of India. Now remember that a republic has a representative government just like ours and just like Britain's. It gets a representative democracy. It becomes the largest democratic nation in the world, based on population. So once India becomes an independent country of Great Britain, it becomes the largest democracy in the world, and continues to be this to this day because there's over 1 billion people that live there now. So this slide and the next slide are a little hard to see, but they're a chart of the evolution, see the change in the independence movement. So it begins with British rule in India. As I said, it was a colony and it was a crown jewel. There's an Indian National Congress that forms. It's a political party that forms in the 1800s, and they represent ethnic Indian rights in the Indian parliamentary system. Generally, these are going to be Hindu Indian rights. There's also another one that will form called the Muslim League, that will represent the rights of Muslims under British rule and under independent rule in India for a while. Then there's going to be a man named Mohandas Gandhi. I'm going to jump back a page. This is him, right? This is Gandhi right here. Mohandas Gandhi, whoops, wrong slide. Sorry, is going to push for non-violent movements, protests, hunger strikes, civil disobedience. He is the inspiration to Dr. King. That says MLK Jr. You can't tell that. That doesn't look like Jr. at all. I'm sorry about that. Jr. Right. He pushes for marches and boycotts. He takes a lot of hunger strikes himself where he literally does not eat. He gets arrested several times for breaking the law. That's what civil disobedience and passive resistance are. It's actively choosing to break laws you feel is unjust. So in the United States examples where African Americans would sit in at and attempt to eat in restaurants that were whites only sections, or when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus. Those are non-violent actions that are breaking the law, but they are to prove that the laws are unjust, that we don't believe in those laws. Gandhi is the forerunner of that. Gandhi is the person who pushes for all of that. And what happens is that there's protests and movements, and it takes wind, and the whole continent, the whole globe hears about this and sees it. And ultimately, there are laws passed. It's not a war. There are laws passed granting freedom to India, granting Indian independence. They're going to divide up amongst Hindu-Muslim lines, so you create Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India in the Indian subcontinent. So I'm going to pull my web page up, India partition, just to show you sort of what we've got for the map here. This one's a good one. So you can see that everything that's colored on this map, that's a little blurry. There we go. Everything that's colored on this map was controlled by India as a colony. The orange and this dark brown become India in general. The green and this gray up here, are Muslim areas, predominantly Muslim areas, where people were living. And you can see that there's some movement here. There's a lot of split, there's a lot of division, and the Hindus move into the orange countries, orange area of India, and the Muslims were moving into the green areas. There was some violence that happened, some attacks that happened in that, which you can see. Maybe if I click on this one for just a second, that there is a lot of poor people, and there's a lot of transition. But back to this map, this gray part up here, Kashmir, was very disputed. Still is. There's sections of that region that are still disputed because they're not divided very well. There are Pakistani Muslims that are living there, but it's still part of it is still controlled by India, which is Hindu. So there is a little bit of violence and tension, but predominantly this is a Muslim country, this is a Muslim country, and this is a Hindu country, right? India creates a democracy, like we said, a representative democracy. They also create a system under Jawaharlal Nehru. He creates an industrial system. They move through their own industrial revolution. It's very late, but it's what's attempting to bring India into the developed world. And like you can see that there's sort of two Indias. There's this India, which is modern and strong and profitable, but then there's also this India, which is the reality for the majority of people who live in India. They live in slums. They live in these cardboard and plywood shanty systems, and their kids are beggars in the streets, and it's dirty and it's polluted, and they don't have access to clean water. And that's the situation that India is dealing with now, is that they have this predominant wealth and trade, and they're a big global market. But at the same time, so many of their citizens lack clean water and sanitation and access to food on a regular basis and medical care. It's a tough political system. It's a tough situation in general, I guess. And the leaders of India are constantly working to figure out what to do to solve these problems for their poor country. Economic funding has helped, but it also is creating a larger gap between the rich and the poor. There are billionaires in India, of course, and there's a very big homeless population. There's also some ethnic and religious differences. You're talking here largely about the Hindus and the Muslims. There's a lot of fighting that happens there that also needs to be solved. But the good news here is, I want to talk about this for just a second. In 1950, India voted to outlaw this discrimination based on your caste. So up to that point, India had still been operating on that system where your job was determined by your birth. There were jobs that weren't available to you based on that. And it was still legal until India gained its independence to deny someone a job based on their birth, based on what you perceived as their religious affiliation, which they outlaw in 1950, which helps promote upward mobility. It helps allow for people to get jobs and that sort of thing. So that has helped some with that situation as well. Right, if you have any questions, as always, let me know. Thanks, guys.